The sky had turned a strange, angry gray, and the winds howled like wild beasts across the small village nestled at the edge of the mountains. Rivers that had once trickled gently through the valley were now raging torrents, tearing away everything in their path. Trees bent like they were made of paper, and the earth shook under the force of the storm. People ran through the streets, carrying what they could, screaming to each other over the roar of the wind and water. Among them, a young girl named Lyra moved with a determination that made her seem fearless, even though her heart pounded with fear. She was only 12 years old, yet in her small chest beat a courage that could rival the bravest warrior. The floodwaters were relentless, swirling around her legs, pulling at her feet as she rushed toward a section of the riverbank where something small and fragile struggled. Her eyes caught a glimpse of movement in the churning water. A tiny shape, dark and slick, fought against the current, its small cries barely audible over the storm. Lyra did not hesitate. Without thinking of her own safety, she plunged into the freezing water. The river tugged at her with violent force, trying to sweep her away, but she kept moving, driven by instinct and something deeper, an undeniable need to protect the helpless creature. The hatchling was no ordinary animal. Its scales shimmered faintly even in the dim light of the storm, hinting at a strange, otherworldly nature. Its wings were too small to fly, and its tiny claws scrambled against the slippery rocks as it fought to survive. Lyra reached it just as the current tried to drag it into a whirlpool. She wrapped her arms around the creature, holding it close to her chest, feeling the frantic beat of its tiny heart against her own. She shouted, her voice lost in the thunder, but she did not let go. The hatchling squirmed and flapped its small wings, letting out a high-pitched cry that pierced through the roar of the storm. Lyra whispered words of comfort, though she did not know if it understood. Her legs trembled as she fought to maintain her footing on the slippery rocks, but she refused to let the creature go. Every step was a battle against the flood, each second a challenge to her strength and resolve. She could feel the cold water biting at her skin, numbing her fingers and toes, but she did not care. Her mind focused only on the hatchling, on saving it from the merciless river that seemed determined to swallow everything in its path. The wind screamed past her ears, carrying with it the scent of wet earth, moss, and danger, and in that moment, everything else faded. There was only her and the small dragon struggling in her arms, fighting against the storm together. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she dragged the hatchling onto a patch of higher ground, a small rise where the water could not reach them. Both of them were drenched, shivering, and exhausted, but alive. Lyra knelt in the mud, holding the creature close, brushing away debris and comforting it with soft murmurs. The hatchling's eyes were wide and intelligent, glowing faintly even in the dim light of the storm. It seemed to study her, almost as if it understood her courage and gratitude. Lyra felt a strange connection to the creature, an unspoken bond that went deeper than words. She did not know what kind of dragon it was, nor did she care. All that mattered was that it was alive, and she had saved it. She whispered her name softly. "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." The hatchling responded with a low, almost musical trill, curling into her arms as if it understood. The storm, however, was not finished. The river continued to rage, tearing through the village, destroying homes, and carrying debris like deadly missiles. Lyra knew she could not stay here. She looked around desperately, spotting a small cave in the hillside just above the river. With the hatchling still clutched to her chest, she scrambled toward it, mud and water slipping beneath her feet. Rocks fell from the cliff above, crashing into the river, sending sprays of water over her and the creature. She nearly lost her footing several times, but something inside her would not let her fail. The hatchling stirred, letting out another soft cry, and she whispered, "Almost there, just a little farther." With one final effort, she reached the cave entrance, collapsing onto the ground inside, soaked to the bone, exhausted beyond measure, but safe for now. Inside the cave, Lyra rested against the cold stone wall, her arms wrapped tightly around the hatchling. She lit a small fire with trembling hands, the flames casting dancing shadows across the walls. The hatchling moved closer to the warmth, nuzzling her chest and letting out a soft, contented chirp. Lyra studied it closely. Its scales were green with streaks of gold, and tiny spines ran along its back. Even its small wings seemed powerful, full of hidden strength. She wondered silently what it would become. In her heart, she knew this was no ordinary creature. It had survived a flood that could have killed anything, and somehow it had chosen her. The thought filled her with a mixture of awe and fear. Something about it felt ancient, wise beyond its years, and she could not shake the feeling that her life had just changed forever. As the storm raged outside, Lyra drifted into a light sleep, the hatchling curled against her. But even in her dreams, she heard a strange, low hum, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. She awoke with a start, her eyes wide as the cave walls seemed to shimmer for a brief moment. The hatchling had lifted its tiny head and was staring into the darkness, its eyes glowing softly. It let out a sound that was half roar, half song, vibrating through the cave. Lyra's heart raced. She did not understand what it meant, but she sensed a promise, or perhaps a warning, hidden in that sound. The hatchling looked at her, then out toward the storm, as if calling to something far away. And in that moment, Lyra realized that saving this creature was not just an act of kindness. It was the beginning of something much larger, something that would reach far beyond the village and the floods, far beyond her own small life. The storm slowly began to fade as the night wore on, leaving the village in ruins but both Lyra and the hatchling alive. She sat in silence, holding the creature close, her mind racing with questions. Who was it? Why had it survived? And most importantly, what did the future hold for them both? She did not yet know that the hatchling would grow not just in size but in power. That one small act of bravery would echo across the years, shaping destinies, kingdoms, and empires. The creature that she had saved that night would one day return, not as a helpless hatchling, but as a legendary force with the power to change the world. And when it did, Lyra would be at the center of it all, the human who had dared to save a dragon against all odds. As the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, illuminating the broken village, the hatchling stirred again, letting out a soft trill that seemed almost like a laugh. Lyra smiled, exhausted but filled with a strange sense of hope. The flood had taken so much, but it had also brought something extraordinary into her life. Somewhere far away, hidden from human eyes, others like the hatchling were stirring, sensing the survival of their kin, and the world was quietly beginning to shift. Lyra did not yet know the full story, but she felt it in her bones. The adventure had only just begun, and one day, everything would return, with power, fire, and wings that could darken the skies. 15 years had passed since that stormy night when Lyra had saved the tiny dragon hatchling. The village had slowly rebuilt itself after the flood, and life had returned to a semblance of normalcy. But for Lyra, nothing was ever normal. The memory of the hatchling, the small, shivering creature she had carried to safety, never left her. Now a young woman, strong and determined, she lived on the edge of the mountains, far from the busy towns and crowded cities. She spent her days tending to animals, helping villagers when she could, and listening to the wind in the trees. Yet lately something had changed. Strange signs began appearing around her home. Footprints too large and clawed for any ordinary animal, shadows moving just beyond sight, and distant eerie roars that echoed through the valleys. Every time she looked up, the sky seemed emptier than usual, yet somehow heavier, as if something immense watched from above. At first, she told herself it was her imagination. After all, dragons were just legends, stories told to children to keep them in line. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that this was no ordinary dream. The hatchling she had saved, the one she had risked her life for, had survived. She could feel it. The wind carried a scent she recognized, metallic and sweet, almost like smoke mixed with rain. Her heart skipped a beat, and she knew the creature was near. The signs grew more frequent. One morning, she found claw marks on the trees near her home, deep and fresh, as if something enormous had passed through the forest. Her curiosity and fear battled inside her, but courage always won. She set out to follow the trail, unsure of what she would find but knowing she had to see it with her own eyes. As Lyra moved through the forest, the air grew thicker, charged with an energy she had never felt before. The birds were silent, the leaves trembling without wind, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to hum. She followed the trail to a cliffside where the rocks had been scorched, blackened as though fire had passed over them recently. And there, perched on a ledge, was the hatchling, no longer small, no longer helpless. It had grown massive, its scales shimmering green and gold in the early morning light. Its wings were strong and full, folded neatly against its back, and its eyes, intelligent and piercing, locked onto hers. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. It was alive. It was real. And it remembered her. The dragon made a low, vibrating sound, a greeting that resonated through the air and deep into Lyra's chest. She stepped closer cautiously, her hands trembling, and whispered, "It's really you. You survived." The hatchling let out a small roar, which sounded almost like laughter, and spread its wings briefly, testing them in the wind. Lyra realized then that this was no ordinary creature. It was aware, intelligent, and powerful beyond anything she had imagined. And it had returned to her for a reason she could not yet understand. Her mind raced with questions. Why now, after 15 years? Why come back at all? And what did it mean for the world she had known, the world of humans who believed dragons were just stories? That night, as she sat beside a small fire in her cabin, the hatchling curled near the hearth, its massive eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Lyra studied it closely. Tiny spines ran along its back, and the faint shimmer of its scales seemed almost magical. She realized she had a unique bond with this creature, a connection forged in danger and courage. She reached out to touch it, and for a moment, it leaned into her hand, letting her feel its warmth and strength. A strange sensation washed over her, a sense that the dragon was trying to communicate, not with words, but with emotion and thought. Lyra closed her eyes, concentrating, and she swore she could feel its memories, flashes of distant lands, storms, and battles she had never seen. The hatchling had lived through incredible experiences, far beyond the human world she knew. The following days were filled with strange discoveries. Lyra noticed subtle changes in the forest around her. Animals moved differently, avoiding certain areas as though sensing the presence of something larger and more commanding. Winds shifted unpredictably, and distant roars echoed across the mountains at night, sometimes accompanied by shadows moving in the sky. Villagers began whispering rumors of a great dragon returning, a fleet of winged creatures gathering somewhere beyond sight. Fear mixed with awe as tales of the dragon spread. Lyra felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She understood now that her act of bravery 15 years ago had set events in motion that could not be undone. Something immense was coming, and she was at the center of it, whether she wanted to be or not. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in blood red and gold, the hatchling lifted its head and roared into the distance. The sound carried for miles, a clear signal that something monumental was beginning. Lyra's heart pounded. She realized that the creature was calling to others, and if the stories were true, an entire fleet might be coming. Questions raced through her mind. What did they want? Were they here to help or to conquer? And what role was she to play in this unfolding destiny? The hatchling turned to her, eyes gleaming, almost as if it understood her thoughts. It was not merely a pet or a companion. It was a leader, a harbinger of something far larger than any single human could imagine. Sleep was impossible that night. Lyra stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the forest and the occasional distant roar. Every instinct told her that the world she knew was about to change. The dragon hatchling she had saved was no longer small or helpless. It had grown in power, wisdom, and influence, and its return was no accident. Somewhere out there, others like it waited, ready to heed the call. Lyra could only wonder if humanity was ready for what was coming. For the first time in her life, She understood that bravery could change destiny, that kindness could ripple across years and miles, and that a single act could ignite events that shaped the future of all living beings. As dawn broke, spilling light across the mountains and valleys, the hatchling took to the sky. Lyra watched in awe, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. Its flight was strong, precise, and purposeful, as if it carried not only itself but an entire destiny with it. She knew that this was only the beginning. 15 years had passed since the flood, but the story was far from over. The hatchling's return signaled a turning point, a moment where the ordinary and the extraordinary would collide. And when the rest of its kind appeared, she would have to face the truth. Her life, her village, and the human world would never be the same again. Lyra's heart raced as the shadows of the mountains stretched long and dark. She whispered softly to herself, almost as a promise, "I will be ready. Whatever comes, I will not run. I saved you once, and I will stand with you now." The wind carried her words into the distance, mingling with the faint echoes of roars, the promise of dragons gathering, and the secrets that were only beginning to reveal themselves. The world outside her cabin was vast, wild, and unpredictable. But inside, a connection had been forged that could withstand storms, floods, and time itself. And Lyra knew, deep in her bones, that the dragon she had saved would one day return with a power so great that no human could ignore it. And when that day came, she would have a choice that could shape the fate of all living creatures. The sky darkened suddenly, though the sun had barely dipped below the horizon. Lyra was walking along the ridge overlooking her village, the cool wind brushing her face, when a shadow passed over her. She froze, heart pounding, eyes scanning the horizon. At first, she thought it was a bird, but it was too large, too deliberate. A low, deep rumble rolled through the mountains, shaking loose stones from the cliffs and echoing like distant thunder. Then she saw them, wings stretching wider than any bird she had ever seen, scales glinting in the fading sunlight, moving with terrifying grace. Her breath caught in her throat. The hatchling, the dragon she had saved 15 years ago, was not alone. It led them. A small squadron of dragons soared behind it, each massive and fearsome, their wings slicing the air, their eyes glimmering with intelligence and power. The wind from their flight whipped her hair into her face, and she stumbled backward, unable to tear her gaze away. This was no ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of something enormous, something that could not be ignored. The hatchling descended toward her, moving with a precision and intelligence that stunned her. Its scales shimmered like molten metal, green and gold, catching the last rays of sunlight. Its wings flared out wide, stirring the air so violently that Lyra had to hold onto a nearby tree to keep from falling. The dragon's eyes locked on hers, piercing and knowing, as though it could see every thought, every fear, every memory she had. She swallowed hard, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's you. I knew you'd come back." The hatchling let out a low, vibrating sound, a greeting or maybe a warning. She could not tell. But there was no aggression, only awareness, intelligence, and something almost reverent. It was as if it remembered the bond they had formed all those years ago and had returned because of it. As the hatchling landed before her, it was massive. Its head reached higher than her waist, claws dug into the ground, and its tail swished with power, stirring the earth. Lyra instinctively stepped back, yet she felt no fear, only awe and wonder. The dragons behind it circled in the distance, keeping watch, their eyes following her every movement. It was clear that she was the center of their attention. The hatchling tilted its head, almost as if questioning her, waiting for her response. Lyra reached out slowly, placing her hand on its scaled snout. A wave of warmth and electricity ran through her arm. The dragon nuzzled her hand, and she felt a strange communication passing between them. No words, only thoughts and emotions. It was calling to her, sharing a sense of purpose, a warning of challenges to come, and a promise that they were not here by accident. The next hours passed in a strange, surreal blur. Lyra could barely process everything. The hatchling moved with an elegance and authority that suggested it commanded the others. She watched as dragons returned from the horizon, one by one, until the sky was full of them. Their wings beat in synchronized rhythm, creating a thunderous sound that shook the valley. Lyra realized with a mixture of fear and awe that this was not just a single dragon or even a small squad. This was a fleet, a massive assembly of creatures with intelligence, power, and strategy. And she, a human who had once saved a tiny hatchling, was at the center of it all. Her mind raced. Why had they returned now? What did they want? And what role was she supposed to play in this new order? Even as questions flooded her mind, the hatchling made a sudden move that forced her attention back to the present. It leapt into the air, twisting and spiraling, its wings beating with immense power. The other dragons followed, forming intricate patterns in the sky that seemed almost purposeful, almost ceremonial. Lyra gasped as she realized she was witnessing a display of coordination, intelligence, and intent that went far beyond anything she had imagined. These were not wild beasts. They were creatures of strategy, discipline, and loyalty. And they were loyal to her. Her heart swelled with a mix of fear and pride, understanding that her choice to save one small dragon had rippled through time to create this moment. She was no longer just a girl in a mountain village. She was part of something larger, something that could change the world forever. Night fell, but the dragons did not rest. They circled above her village, wings cutting through the air like knives, tails swishing with controlled strength, eyes glowing in the darkness. Lyra stood on the ridge, unable to tear her eyes away, feeling the weight of what was coming. The hatchling descended again, landing softly before her, eyes gleaming with a strange light. She felt it again. The unspoken bond, the connection that had survived 15 years, a bond that seemed to tell her, the world will never be the same, and neither will you. But together we can face what comes. The wind carried the faint roar of the fleet, mingling with the smell of ozone and rain, and Lyra realized she had to make a choice. She could run, try to hide, or she could embrace the impossible, the extraordinary, and face the future alongside these magnificent creatures. Her hands trembled as she reached out again, this time placing both hands on the hatchling's snout. It lowered its head, letting her feel the full weight of its presence. And in that moment, Lyra understood. This was not just a dragon returning for old debt or gratitude. It had come to her because she had been chosen to stand in the center of something far greater than herself, far greater than humanity had ever known. And as the other dragons circled above, the night alive with the sound of their wings, Lyra felt a surge of determination. Whatever came next, whatever dangers and challenges awaited, she would not run. She had saved one life once, and that act had returned to her multiplied 1,000-fold. The hatchling nudged her gently, a reminder that the future was calling, and the time for waiting had ended. From the ridge, Lyra looked down at her village. Lights twinkled in the darkness, unaware of the extraordinary sight above. She knew that soon, humans would see them too, and reactions would vary from fear to awe, perhaps even war. But she had a choice now, a role she could not escape. The hatchling had returned, not as a helpless creature, but as a commander, a leader of a fleet, ready to bring its power into the world. And Lyra, the girl who had braved a flood to save a single hatchling, now faced the weight of destiny. A destiny she could not ignore, a destiny that would change everything she had known. And as she looked up at the sky filled with dragons, she realized with a shiver of excitement and fear that nothing would ever be the same again. The first light of dawn broke over the mountains, casting long shadows across the village, but the sky above was alive with movement. Lyra stood at the edge of the ridge, her heart pounding as she watched the dragons sweep in from the horizon. It wasn't just the hatchling anymore. Hundreds of dragons filled the skies, their wings cutting through the air with precision and power. Each dragon moved as if part of a single mind, circling, twisting, and hovering, their scales catching the sunlight in flashes of gold and green. The sound of their wings beating in unison was like distant thunder, a warning and an announcement at the same time. Villagers below began to emerge from their homes, faces pale with fear and awe, pointing skyward, whispering about the impossible creatures above. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. This was the full fleet, the true scale of what she had set in motion years ago. The hatchling led them, flying closer, its eyes locked on Lyra, its wings slicing the air with authority. Every move it made commanded respect, not just from the others, but from her. She realized that this was not a simple return. This was a gathering, a preparation for something far larger, something that might change the world entirely. Her mind raced, imagining what they could do together, or what might happen if humans reacted with fear or hostility. Already, some villagers had started to run, screaming, trying to escape what they didn't understand. The dragons seemed aware of the humans below but ignored them, moving with purpose, focusing on Lyra as if she were the center of their universe. She felt the weight of that attention, a mixture of pride, awe, and the heavy burden of responsibility. The hatchling landed near her, shaking the ground with its immense weight, and let out a roar that echoed across the valleys. It was deep, powerful, and commanding, a sound that seemed to reverberate not just through the mountains but through her very bones. The other dragons responded in kind, each voice joining in a chorus that filled the sky, vibrating through the earth and air. Lyra felt something stir within her, a strange recognition, a deep connection to these creatures, and a certainty that they would follow her wherever she led. She reached out a trembling hand to touch the hatchling, and the warmth of its body and the hum of its presence filled her with a mixture of fear and determination. She understood now that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a young woman in a quiet village. She had become the center of something extraordinary, something that demanded courage, intelligence, and leadership beyond anything she had ever imagined. Hours passed as she watched the fleet move, circling and landing in formations that seemed almost military. They were not random. They were organized, disciplined, and strategic. Lyra's mind raced as she realized the implications. This was not just a dragon army. It was a force capable of power and destruction on a scale she could barely comprehend. And yet, they had come to her, not to threaten, but to follow, to respond to the bond that had begun 15 years ago with a single act of bravery. The hatchling, now fully grown and majestic, nudged her gently, reminding her that she had a choice. She could run, hide, or embrace this new reality and lead them. The decision weighed on her like a mountain, but deep down, she knew what she would do. That evening, as the sky turned shades of crimson and gold, Lyra climbed to the highest ridge, overlooking the full fleet. Dragons perched on cliffs, hovering above trees, and roared softly among themselves, communicating in ways she could not yet understand. She could sense their intelligence, their awareness, their readiness for something monumental. It was then she realized. This fleet was not just returning for companionship or gratitude. They were preparing for a mission, a journey, or perhaps even a war. And if humans reacted with fear or violence, the consequences could be catastrophic. Her mind turned to the villages, the cities, the kingdoms beyond her mountains. How would they react to a fleet of dragons led by a human? The weight of destiny pressed down on her, but she did not flinch. She had saved one life once, and that act had set in motion something much larger. She would not turn away now. Night fell, and the dragons remained vigilant. The hatchling curled its massive form near her, wings folding around it like armor. Lyra sat beside it, feeling the hum of power, intelligence, and loyalty radiating from the creature. She knew that she had to prepare, not just herself, but also the humans who would soon witness the fleet's arrival. She spent the night imagining strategies, understanding that the dragon's presence would change everything. They were not just companions. They were allies, warriors, and harbingers of a new era. And she, the girl who had risked everything in a flood 15 years ago, was now at the center of it all. By dawn, the fleet had settled, vast and commanding, stretching as far as she could see. Lyra felt a mixture of awe, fear, and determination. The coming days would be crucial. The world beyond the mountains would notice soon, and reactions could range from awe to panic to outright war. But one thing was certain: the dragons were hers, loyal to her, and they were ready. And Lyra, who had once been a girl saving a tiny hatchling, was ready too. Whatever came next, she would face it. The full fleet had returned, and with it came a future that was no longer ordinary, a destiny shaped by courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a human and a dragon. The sky above glowed with the silhouettes of wings, the sound of their calls echoing through the valleys. And in her heart, Lyra knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The news spread faster than wildfire. By the time the sun rose over the mountains, the presence of the dragons was no longer a secret. Villagers who had fled during the first sightings returned cautiously, eyes wide with fear and awe. Rumors traveled even farther. Traders, travelers, and messengers carried tales of a girl commanding a fleet of dragons, a human who had somehow earned the loyalty of creatures thought to exist only in legends. Kingdoms and armies beyond the mountains began to stir. Soldiers, scholars, and diplomats debated feverishly. Should they confront the dragons, flee from them, or attempt to form alliances? Lyra felt the weight of their attention like a physical force pressing down on her shoulders. She had no time for fear. She had to act, to guide these creatures and prepare the humans for the changes that were coming. One wrong move, one act of aggression, could spark chaos, and she knew it. The hatchling, now a magnificent dragon of enormous size, watched her closely, its intelligent eyes reflecting both concern and expectation. Other dragons circled above, scanning the horizon, wings slicing the air with precision and power. They seemed to sense the humans' unease, the tension in the villages, and the silent fear that spread like a shadow across the kingdoms. Lyra realized that this was her responsibility as well as theirs. She could not just stand aside and let misunderstanding or fear ignite a war. She had to prepare the humans, to show them that the dragons were not monsters to be destroyed, but allies to be respected. And she had to act quickly because there were already whispers of those who wanted to capture or kill the dragons, fearing their immense power. She sent messengers to nearby towns and cities, calling for leaders to come and see the dragons before rumors escalated into panic. Word spread of a human who commanded dragons, and curiosity mixed with fear as armies and emissaries approached. Lyra watched from the ridge as the first contingents arrived, soldiers with armor gleaming in the sunlight, scholars carrying scrolls and tools to record what they saw, and envoys with expressions of disbelief. The dragons did not attack. They circled above with a calm authority, their presence awe-inspiring. Lyra took a deep breath, stepping forward to meet the humans. Her voice, though soft, carried across the valley. "These creatures are not here to harm you. They are with me, and they will follow my command. If we act together, we can face the challenges ahead. If we fight them, we risk everything." The soldiers and emissaries exchanged wary glances, unsure whether to believe her words or fear the fleet above. Tension escalated as rival factions within the human armies debated what to do. Some wanted to take weapons to the dragons, seeing them as threats too great to ignore. Others wanted to negotiate, recognizing that the girl who commanded the dragons had a bond that could not be broken. Lyra understood that she needed to demonstrate her authority and the dragon's loyalty without provoking fear. With the hatchling at her side, she signaled the dragons to perform a display of coordination and obedience. The dragons lifted into the sky, moving in synchronized patterns that seemed almost impossible, their wings cutting through the clouds, their roars echoing across the valleys. Every eye turned to them, and every heart felt the mix of fear and awe. The humans began to understand. These were not wild beasts. They were intelligent, disciplined, and loyal to her alone. As the days passed, alliances began to form. Some kingdoms sent soldiers to train under her guidance, learning to move alongside the dragons and coordinate strategies. Scholars studied the dragons, trying to understand their behavior, communication, and strength. Even ordinary villagers began to see the dragons not as monsters, but as allies, protectors, and symbols of power. Lyra worked tirelessly, guiding both humans and dragons, forging a fragile but growing trust between them. Yet she could feel the tension beneath the surface, the fear that a single mistake could ignite a war. Rival factions still plotted, and whispers of betrayal reached her ears. She knew that leadership meant more than courage. It meant vigilance, intelligence, and the ability to act decisively when danger arose. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lyra stood on the ridge, overlooking the dragons and the humans now gathered together. Soldiers practiced maneuvers beneath the circling wings of the fleet, while scholars recorded their behavior, and villagers tended to supplies and communication lines. The hatchling landed beside her, eyes glowing in the dim light, and nuzzled her hand as if offering reassurance. She understood the message clearly. They were ready to follow her, no matter the risk. And yet, she also knew that the humans were fragile, unpredictable, and capable of mistakes. One wrong move could turn trust into fear, cooperation into conflict. She took a deep breath, feeling the hum of energy from the dragons beneath her fingertips. The alliance was forming, but it was delicate, and she needed wisdom as much as courage to hold it together. As night fell, the valley glowed with fires from both humans and dragons. The air vibrated with the sound of wings, roars, and the quiet hum of anticipation. Lyra looked up at the stars, imagining the challenges yet to come. This alliance was only the beginning. Beyond the mountains, kingdoms would react, armies would move, and enemies, both human and otherwise, would test the strength of her bond with the dragons. But for the first time, she felt a sense of purpose, a clarity that all her years, all her struggles had led to this moment. The dragons were her allies, the humans were beginning to trust, and the future, though uncertain, was hers to shape. She whispered softly to the hatchling, her voice steady with resolve. Together, we will be stronger than anything they can imagine. Together, we will face what comes. The wind carried her words across the valley, mingling with the roars and wing beats of the dragons. And for the first time in 15 years, Lyra felt the weight of destiny settle comfortably on her shoulders. She was no longer a girl who had saved a hatchling in a flood. She was the leader of a fleet, a commander of dragons, and the center of a fragile but growing alliance that could change the world forever. And in the shadows of the mountains, beyond the reach of human eyes, forces were already moving, watching, waiting, and preparing. Lyra knew that the coming days would test her courage, her intelligence, and her heart. But she was ready, and with the dragons by her side, she would face whatever came next. The valley was alive with sound and movement. Dragons soared through the sky, wings beating in unison, their scales glinting in sunlight like living jewels. Soldiers marched in perfect lines, their armor reflecting the brilliant light, while scholars, villagers, and envoys watched in awe. Lyra stood at the highest ridge, her heart pounding, eyes fixed on the hatchling, the dragon that had grown into a massive, regal creature, leader of the fleet. She had spent 15 years preparing for this moment without knowing it. Every choice she had made, every act of courage had led to this instant. The humans and dragons below looked to her, waiting, their loyalty and trust fully pledged. And now the world was ready to witness something extraordinary. The hatchling, now immense and commanding, descended gracefully, landing before her with the force of a mountain behind it. Its wings folded elegantly at its sides, tail curling like a sweeping banner, eyes glowing with intelligence and recognition. It nudged Lyra gently, and in that single gesture, she felt the weight of centuries, the promise of loyalty, and the bond that had begun in a storm 15 years ago. The other dragons circled above, their formation precise, a living crown of power and awe. Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of what was happening. This was not just a return. This was a coronation, a moment that would change the fate of humans and dragons alike. The humans approached cautiously, murmuring among themselves, unsure whether to kneel, bow, or speak. Lyra raised her hand, calling for silence. The dragons responded instantly, wings flaring, roars filling the valley in a harmonious song that resonated deep within the mountains. The sound was overwhelming, yet beautiful, a force that commanded respect without threatening destruction. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady, carrying across the entire valley. These creatures have come with me, not to harm, but to honor courage, loyalty, and the bond between human and dragon. Today we stand together. Today, we witness a future where both can thrive. She paused, feeling the energy of the dragons beneath her and the attentive eyes of humans around her. Every heartbeat in the valley seemed synchronized with the rhythm of wings above. With a slow, deliberate motion, the hatchling extended one enormous claw, revealing a crown woven of gold, silver, and dragon-forged materials, its design intricate and alive with shimmering energy. Placed the crown before Lyra, and in that instant time seemed to pause. The dragons lowered their heads, wings folded, eyes locked on her. The humans held their breath, the air thick with anticipation. Lyra stepped forward, kneeling before the hatchling as tradition and instinct demanded. With a gentle nudge, the dragon lifted the crown, placing it upon her head with a precision and care that belied its massive size. A wave of warmth, power, and understanding washed over her. She felt the loyalty of the dragons, the respect of the humans, and the weight of destiny settling fully upon her shoulders. She was no longer just a girl who had saved a hatchling in a flood. She was Empress, chosen by the dragons themselves, a bridge between worlds. As she rose, the dragons roared in unison, a sound that shook the mountains and echoed across valleys far and wide. Lyra lifted her hands, and the dragons responded to her gestures, circling above in an intricate display of allegiance. The humans watched in awe, some falling to their knees, others raising their swords in respect. She felt a surge of pride and responsibility. This was not power for herself, but a duty to protect, to lead, and to honor the bond that had brought them all together. The hatchling nudged her once more, and she could feel its thoughts: trust, loyalty, and a silent message. The future is ours to shape, together. From that moment, the world began to change. Kingdoms that once feared dragons now sought guidance. Humans learned to work alongside dragons, creating cities and settlements that honored their power and wisdom. The valley became a symbol of unity, courage, and the extraordinary bond between species. Lyra, the girl who had faced floods and storms, had become the Empress of dragons and humans alike. Her name would be remembered in both human and dragon histories as the one who bridged worlds, the one who turned fear into awe and legends into reality. And as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, the dragons roared one last time, a chorus of loyalty, power, and celebration. Lyra stood tall, crown gleaming on her head, wings of dragons circling above like living banners. She smiled, her heart steady, knowing that whatever challenges came next, she would face them with courage, with dragons at her side, and with the world ready to follow her lead. The journey that began with a flood, a hatchling, and a single act of bravery had reached its triumphant peak. And yet, in her chest, Lyra knew the adventure was far from over. Together, they would shape the future. An age of dragons, humans, and a legend that would never be forgotten.